So we are live on YouTube. Volume down. All right. Hello, 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 hello to all my friends out there in YouTube land and video land, vidcast land, Facebook land, land of the free, home of the brave, wherever you want to be, whatever you want to do. We're just glad to be here today. It is another Friday. That's Friday, not Fried space day, but it's another Friday. We're just glad to be here today. Again, welcome to Momentum, a stewardship idea where we try to bring you the best that we possibly can in the most formidable way to help bring you closer to the realm of pleasantry and to the realm of harmony. So we're just glad today. And of course, it's great to have a team, and we all need to have a team. There's no I in team, and I'm glad to have, look at him, he's punch ready. I was gonna say punch drunk, but no, he's punch ready now. If I am salt, he is pepper. We're not a rap group, but we work just like that. What's going on today? Elder Jeffrey Healy, better known as Pepper from the Westminster Presbyterian Church in Tiburon, California. How you doing today, Elder Healy?
It is a great day. I just found a rubber band before we went on, and I'm just thinking about how all year it's been stretched. And now we're letting it ease up a little bit and hoping that that rubber band can maintain its elasticity. It's been a tough year. Yeah, one of the reasons it's worked, it's been okay, is because of our guest today.
Right. And we're just really glad to have our guest today. Great guy. He is the leader there at the emergency center at the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital Emergency Center. He's been with us before, and he's back to be with us again. Let's all give a rousing hello and welcome to our guest today, Dr. Chris Caldwell. Dr. Caldwell, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Curtis, thank you for having me on, and good to see both you and Jeff out there. I want to be part of this rap group if you take us on that.
Oh yeah.
But no, we're it's great to be here, and in particular after the last time I was on when we talked about some really tough issues, and Jeff's right. It has been a very tough year, and what I'm really seeing right now is that light at the end of the tunnel that is brighter and brighter now. And so I'm really glad to be back here with much better news than we had even just a few weeks ago.
All right, great. Well, I'm going to let Elder Healy start the questioning off today. I know you guys are tennis partners, and the Wimbledon, U.S. Open, all that stuff.
Well, thank you. And I'm an elder in I think only in age anymore. It used to mean you were wise. Chris, you went through medical school, you went to the University of Michigan, then you did med school. When you were getting to the hospital for your training, they'd make you go hour upon hour upon hour upon hour, really overwork you, to see how you could apply the things you had in the classroom. Now you're thrown into the real operating part of it. Got to be tough. How did that training help you for this marathon we've been through the last year?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, because medical training has changed. And I think it's changed for the better. We have controlled those ridiculous hours that went on when I was training. And I think that is a good thing. But I will say also that I did feel better prepared, having gone through what that training was, where 80, 90, 100-hour, 120-hour work weeks were not unusual. And we certainly saw some of that here during the pandemic. And I do think that we were better prepared because of some of those experiences, not just in terms of me personally, but we've also unfortunately had to deal with some disasters. Certainly nothing that looked just like this, but in terms of mass shootings, I was a physician at the scene for the Columbine shootings and the Aurora Theater shootings, and those, although they're obviously very different from what we're dealing with here, but they did prepare you for how you're going to manage situations where you potentially don't have enough resources to apply to everybody that needs it, and how you're going to address that issue, and to be sure that we are doing the very best we can for as many as we can. So yes, that training and sometimes the extended hours certainly helped in getting prepared for this, but nothing really prepared us for what this last year has been.
Thank you for that. You and Curtis, and I promised Curtis I'm not going to ask him too many questions today.
You're not interviewing me. I'm going to say, Chris.
Exactly. But the one thing, there's many things you guys share, and your faith is one, which is just absolutely wonderful. The pressure that you are both under in your daily job, how do you manage that stress? Who will guard the guardians? How do you decompress after all this stress for an entire year? And the reason I want to ask it is if you can sort of help the audience figure out, this has been a year of just unbelievable stress on so many people in so many ways. How do you handle it?
Is that for me or for Curtis?
Or Curtis won't let me ask him a question. That's for you.
You're trying. He's trying, Chris. You little sneaky.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Curtis's answer to that too. I go to Curtis. I go let him kind of talk me down from some of these things. No, I think it's a great question, and there's absolutely truth to that as well. But there are times that you do have to separate and have to let it sink in a little bit. In some ways, I was thankful for the times that we were so busy, I didn't have time to think about it. And you're going from patient to patient and from kind of critical situation to critical situation. They were different sometimes, but you were busy enough that you didn't have time to stop and think about it. But obviously you have to take that time, and it does take a toll. And so you do need to be able to separate yourself entirely from it. You and I, Jeff, talk about tennis, and I am really blessed that I have some not only some activities, but some people that I can go to and sometimes just talk about nothing related to medicine, nothing related to the pandemic. And it is so important to take some time to do that, to take some time to take care of ourselves, because we've forgotten about that. And particularly with healthcare providers, we are not good at that. I'm sure there are other professions as well, but I know that about healthcare providers, we are not good at taking care of ourselves. And I honestly believe I am far better at taking care of my patients when I have taken the appropriate measures to take care of myself. And so this pandemic was really a good reminder of how important that is, to get to sleep, to get the exercise, to get the time away from the hospital. And the good news is we although we got hit very hard here in San Francisco and the Bay Area, we did not get overwhelmed to the same extent that some of the other places did. So when you talk about New York and LA and other big cities, there were times they got so overwhelmed they didn't have providers that were rested and could take care of patients, and we did. We were able to relieve each other in really a format that allowed everybody to take good enough care of themselves that we were able to really focus and take great care of the patients that we did see. And I'd say across the Bay Area that happened. We're really fortunate, and we're thankful to the Bay Area community for doing that. They really did. They followed by the precautions to a greater degree than a lot of other cities did. They wore masks. They did social distancing. They didn't party to the extent that many other cities did. And so we weren't overwhelmed to the same degree. And although it was clearly a very difficult time, that the Bay Area community really stepped up and did this as well as anybody could in a pandemic.
That's great. You mentioned the mask, and it flashed a question in my mind. The best doctors that I've ever dealt with, had experiences with, didn't treat me as the rotator cuff in room 204. It was Jeff Healy with a rotator cuff. What sort of special challenges and how do you, in a pandemic, everybody's wearing masks, how do you maintain a human touch in an environment like this?
It is hard, and for a while, particularly the physician-patient relationship and interaction is so important, and you do have to touch patients in order to really connect with them, and sometimes it's just on their hand, if that maybe is what the issue is that they're having. but this made it very difficult. And there were times I was going into the room, particularly if they had complaints consistent with COVID-19, that I was wearing what almost felt like sometimes a spacesuit, and there are masks, there are goggles, there are hats, there are scrubs and gowns and all these things, and it really made that difficult. What I would say is I was reminded of how much you can say and read with your eyes. And we were always able to see each other and see each other's eyes. And, you can see a smile with eyes. You can see fear with eyes. And so we started to really pay better attention to that, and to really notice how expressive we can be with our eyes, with our arms and hands and bodies, and even in ways that that personal protective equipment did prevent to some degree. So there are still ways to do it, but you're right, it's a critically important part of that relationship, and something that really needs to be paid attention to, even more so in the pandemic.
Great. I'm going to let Curtis ask a question after one more, and then we'll go back and forth. Doctors typically, or not typically, often use Bayesian analysis. They look at what are the primary signs that I'm seeing here, and figure out what's the probability that's this, or this. How tough in this environment? And I also want, if you could, tell us about the spider story.
Okay. Well, yeah, the spider story is not exclusive to the pandemic by any means. And so I'll go straight into to that part of it. So we had, and we'll get patients sometimes because they're dealing with different things in their lives, and other times, occasionally, they will indulge in substances that lead us to believe that there are things out there that aren't there. And so a relatively typical complaint sometimes, particularly with certain substance ingestions, is there are spiders all over the wall. And so we hear that story enough that our immediate concern when we hear that, I'm worried about all the spiders that are on the walls or around me. And when we hear that, we immediately tend to suspect, okay, that maybe there were some substances that were ingested, or perhaps they're struggling with some mental health issues or other things. And so I remember very distinctly a patient coming in and saying, among other things, by the way, I'm really concerned about all the spiders. And as I'm walking away saying, okay, I'm going to probably have to potentially worry about substance ingestions and maybe mental health issues, I noticed he had his clothes there, and sure enough, there was a spider right on his clothes. And I got to say, this was one of those times where he was right. There were spiders all over, and it was a great reminder again that we sometimes we jump to conclusions, and I've got to be very careful not to do that. So a pandemic has reminded us of many things. There absolutely are some silver linings here, but it was obviously an extraordinarily difficult year for everybody.
Thank you. Bar.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And Chris, great answers as always. So I think the last time you were on this show, I'm going to guess and say that there are maybe 20,000 people who had died. I think it's been about a year, right? We hadn't reached that 100,000 death milestone for sure. How has this changed medicine? What will you do after this that will stick that you were not doing before?
Yeah, so and it's a great question, and something that we have to be asking ourselves all the time, because we cannot let the lessons that we have learned here be lost, and we have to be better. I think we were good, and particularly in the Bay Area, because of the community response. We were good at many things, but we weren't perfect by any means, and we needed to learn from that. One thing I think we're all taking away is, and it hit me really hard when we review a lot of our medical cases so that we can learn from them. And one of the things we do is we'll review major resuscitations on a videotape. We'll videotape them and then review them, make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to benefit our patients. And then we destroy the videotape. But we were reviewing one of those and it happened to be been taken right before the pandemic. And I looked at it and I said, we weren't wearing masks. In many cases, they weren't wearing gowns or gloves. And obviously it was right before the pandemic hit, but it was a great reminder that we shouldn't have been doing that in the first place. I think we are now in a very different normal. I don't know what normal looks like in our community and for all things, but I do know that our new normal in the hospital is going to be wearing masks, and particularly in patients with respiratory symptoms. And that's for our protection, for their protection. And it's because whatever happens with the COVID-19, this coronavirus, we are going to be at risk for viral pandemics in the future. There is no question. And in fact, I think we could make an argument that may be our greatest risk, given population issues and densities and so many other things. And so we need to be on the alert for viruses, whether it be COVID-19 or the next one. And obviously, I hope that never happens, but we need to be ready for it. And I think if we are better prepared for something like that, we can prevent the spread. You talked about deaths, and we now have obviously crossed the 500,000 deaths in this country. And it's sometimes overwhelming to think about the impact that this pandemic has had. And I don't know exactly what it would have looked like if we had ramped up earlier, if we had done some things differently early on in this pandemic, maybe taken it more seriously when we first started hearing about cases in early January of 2020. And so I think now we're better prepared to do something like that. And we need to keep those lessons. We need to keep that, what we've learned here, as part of our practice. So it is going to look different. I can't imagine going into rooms without a mask on, particularly with respiratory issues. Again, even when we are in a different stage of this pandemic.
That's great. I was on a call yesterday, Jeff, you'll find this interesting also, with Blue Ivy Ventures and the Yard Ventures. That was Yale and Harvard getting together. They say they're like the number one shop in the country right now. Healy, you better catch up, man. But it was interesting.
They always say that. Yale and Harvard always
say that.
What's the old joke? How can you tell if somebody's a vegan? Don't worry, they'll tell you. How can Harvard? Don't worry, they'll tell you.
Hey, I'll take that, right? So it was interesting. They did a survey, right? They had several segments that they were launching. One was entertainment. I think one was social media. One was communications. And the other one was healthcare. And what was interesting was that 27% of the participants said that they were more ready to invest in more health-related venture platforms, which was the majority. I think 23% were like into communications, right? So, this has impacted how even, investors look. Telemedicine. What are your insights on how we will be looking at that kind of platform and others that come along with that? What is your take on that?
Yeah, and I think that's another example of something in medicine that we've been talking about for a while, but this forced us to do it. And so again, we've got to grab these silver linings. As devastating as this pandemic has been, we owe it to all of our community to learn from what has happened and to move forward. And telemedicine has been something we've been talking about for many, many years, and have never really delved into it to the same degree that we did during the pandemic. And it forced us to do this and forced us to learn where we can do telemedicine. And there's a lot of things we can do that people can have better access to. So one of the biggest challenges for our medical system, and one of, I think, the biggest flaws in our medical system, is access. And although people can always access an emergency department, most people don't want to do that if they don't have an emergency. And so we need better access to primary care. We need better access to physicians that you might not need today, this minute, but you do need access to them. And you can't wait 6 months, 8 months, a year sometimes to get that. And telemedicine has really been a good step in that direction, where we can get better access to a greater number of healthcare providers with different specialties, different areas of expertise, and sometimes bring them together in a way that we couldn't when they had to be there in person. And so there are some things in medicine that we'll never be able to do with telemedicine. And I would argue a lot of my job in emergency medicine is really got to be hands-on. We've got to be able to lay hands on patients. But there are some things, even in emergency medicine, and certainly in some specialties, that can absolutely be done very effectively over telemedicine and give greater access to people that might not have had that access previously.
Dr. Healy?
Doctor, my grandfather's a doctor, so I wasn't smart enough. I couldn't go to Michigan or.
Tell the truth. It was the blood. You couldn't take the blood. Come on. Tell the truth. You're smart.
So I was an officer in the Navy, and one of the things the Navy does and the Army does that I love is they take a junior officer and they have a very senior enlisted person that's been through it, that sort of help them through. Not saying this is a perfect analogy. Can you talk a little bit about a story or two, or the great work that nurses and med techs did during this whole thing as well?
Oh my goodness, yes. I would say that, and even more so in the emergency department, where I saw this directly, but it went across the board. Early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of fear on everybody's part. There was so much we didn't know. And a lot of that related to exactly how this was transmitted, exactly how. I remember there were people, myself included, that were cleaning off UPS packages and leaving them untouched for 2 weeks, that worried that that's how we were going to get this virus. And it's so many crazy things, but it was just a reflection of fear. And yet we had nurses and healthcare techs, and yes, physicians, but even more so, some of the even more frontline workers that would still come to work every day, knowing that there was so much that was unknown, taking a very real risk to themselves and to their families, and knowing that our calling to care for patients now more than ever was a critical one. And so no, you saw that in so many of these of healthcare providers, and I would say nurses and healthcare techs, and the clerks, and the other people that really help really make an emergency department and a hospital run, were heroes, even beyond anything that I did, to really take patients through that. At times I was so busy, I was running from patient to patient. They were spending time actually addressing what many of the patients really needed, was just to hear that they were going to be okay, and that we were going to do everything we could for them. And a lot of times it was those folks that you're talking about that were every bit and more so the heroes.
Thanks. How did your triage decision-making change during the last 6-7 months?
So yeah, we really prepared for having to make some very, very difficult decisions. And I remember early on, some of the media outlets were asking questions of a lot of us, like, okay, you have a 36-year-old male and a 48-year-old female, and they both need a ventilator and you only have one. How are you going to make that decision? And in a lot of ways, they were questions that didn't have answers to them. But we were trying to prepare, okay, what would we do under scenarios where we didn't have enough ventilators? Now, we never reached that point here in the Bay Area. Some places in this country and this world did, but we didn't, but we were preparing for answering those kind of questions, and making a call that we're really not prepared to make. Right? That's a judgment call that none of us are in a true position to make, and yet we're trying to think of a situation where we had to. And so we did have some of those discussions that I think we need to move further on, not just in medicine, actually across all of our community. And that's really a goals of care discussion that we should be having now. I should be having. I'm 55 years old. I don't have any medical issues. Now's the time I should be having a goals of care discussion. What are my goals of care? What are my priorities? I have young kids, relatively young kids. They're teenagers now, but those are going to be a little different than they are in a few years when they're all in their 20s and out working again. And we all need to be asking ourselves that question and our family members that question and really have a good understanding. It's still surprising to me how many times I will ask somebody with very well into their medical issues and their medical challenges. And I've said, so what are your goals here? What do you want to have happen in terms of these next steps for our goals of care? And I still see way too many blank looks. Like, I've never thought of that. I've never had that asked of me, and I've never really had that discussion. And I think that's a tragedy. I think we should all be having that discussion. And obviously that evolves over time, and it's going to look different for some of us, depending on the point we are in our lives. But you can't apply a goals of care to any two people the same way. And this pandemic has highlighted what are the goals of care. And they might be very different for somebody that, if I'm talking about putting them on a ventilator, I know that their chances of getting off that ventilator are almost zero, and their chances of suffering and being miserable for the end of their life is almost certain. And yet, in some cases, we do that because we haven't had those discussions, and we haven't been honest about having. Sometimes they're very tough discussions, but they're important to have. And so triage is certainly a responsibility that we have, and particularly in emergency medicine, do all the time. But we can all be more involved in that discussion, and having some of those right now, just in terms of goals of care, what we want is so important. And then we can all be involved in that triage decision.
One more question, Curtis, and that is, in this Zoom world that we find ourselves in, and thank you for having this today as well, how did that impact, hopefully help, to share more options globally?
Right. No, it has. And, we're already doing so much more by Zoom, and people are going Zoom crazy, and I get it. I very much look forward to a time when we can have meetings not by Zoom. And we're going to always have meetings by Zoom from now on. Back to the earlier question that Curtis asked, what is going to stay? Well, that's one of the things that's going to stay, because we actually are now having meetings that involve other people that before we couldn't have. Or if we'd have them, we couldn't involve those folks because they might not be able to be there in person, or maybe they're out of town or whatever. Now we can bring them in. And so even though I desperately want to go back to some in-person meetings and get-togethers, I also know that we're going to be able to have now more involvement than we had before. I mean, even our men's connection, Friday morning men's connection, I don't think we're going to ever not at least have a Zoom in possibility. Although I really look forward to when we can see each other in person again, and that's not too far away. We're going to, I hope, always have a Zoom option, because it's such a better way of involving other people. And for medicine, it's exactly the same. I could get in a patient that has a complex medical situation, I can get a neurologist, a dermatologist, another specialist all together at once, where to get them in person in the emergency department could be very, very difficult.
Cool. Thank you. I'm looking forward to Bruce Nelson bringing up breakfast again. They were always so good.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I will say, this is the shortest commute I've had ever. Well, I've worked out of my home before, right? Maybe like 15 years ago, but I love to commute. I love to be able to work from 8 to 8 or 8 to 12, whatever. It's like to me, it seems like you're just a little bit more in control. And I like it. Look, I want to get together again with the guys in Tiburon and shake hands and hug, so he can give me that Indiana chest bump.
Illinois.
Right? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I know he's dying to wrestle with me again, but you're 2 years older, buddy. You're 2 years older. Hey, look, Chris, what is going on in Brazil and in other places around the world where we're seeing this new wave? How does that make you feel? Tell us what to do.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's a good reminder. As much as this feels so much better right now than even just a few weeks ago. I sat here and talked to the men's group about, it wasn't that long ago that we were absolutely full to capacity in the hospital. Our ICUs were full, and we were really struggling. And here we are just a few weeks later in a much, much better spot. But we are not over this pandemic. And I think it is critically important that we remember that. And what's going on in Brazil and South Africa and the UK and other places, these variants of the COVID-19 virus are reminders that we are not over this yet. Now, the answer is still very much the same. We need to get our community vaccinated. And again, as with so many other things, our Bay Area community is really doing well. We've gotten over 25% of all eligible people for the vaccine, that's eligible over the age of 16, vaccinated. That's a great start. If you go to those over 65, it's even higher than that, much higher than that. And so we've got a good start to it. We need to keep going. We have gotten over some of the initial reluctance with the vaccines, not all of it, but it's certainly much better now. I'm seeing a lot more acceptance and much fewer questions about why not to get the vaccine, and more asking what's going to happen when I get the vaccine. Very good questions, very reasonable questions, but we really do need to get our community vaccinated, and the variants are just a greater emphasis that we need to get folks vaccinated. What I would say is that although the vaccines are not as effective with some of these variants as they are, or as they were for the COVID-19 virus, they are still effective, and they are still very effective at preventing serious illness or death. And so, although nothing is perfect, these vaccines are really, really good, better than influenza vaccines that we've had for many, many years. And so we need to really continue, to keep our precautions going. We can't get back into big groups of people that are unmasked and unvaccinated. We cannot do that. Not yet. We need to get people vaccinated. We can start to talk about opening up a little bit once we have the group vaccinated, but that really needs to be our focus. And until then, maintain social distancing, maintain avoiding groups, large groups, and particularly indoors, and maintain those masks. I know it's hard. There is light at that end of the tunnel, and it is a brighter light now.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that we're gonna have to do this vaccine where we do our flu shots like annually? Will that be the case?
Yeah, I really do think that's the case. We're already seeing the potential need for a booster, maybe even in the next 6 months or so, because of those variants. And it's a virus mutating. It makes sense. It's what viruses do. And so we're not surprised that there are variants, but they're worrisome in the sense that they will affect people differently, even if they potentially have had COVID-19 before. And we have seen some of that, certainly, or potentially if they're vaccinated. I would say right now, the vaccine is even more effective at preventing serious disease than having had the virus before. So we get those questions sometimes, what if I've had the virus, should I get the vaccine? The answer is absolutely yes. The other question is, which vaccine should I get? And I would say, get the first vaccine that can get into your arm. So the approved vaccines now, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, I would get whichever is the first one I could get in my arm. So I just think that those are important, the important next step in really addressing this pandemic. But to answer your question, I really do believe we're going to fall into a situation where we will probably need hopefully annual, not more frequently than that, but once a year boosters like we do for the influenza vaccine.
Mm-hmm. I have one up. Just can I do one more, Healy?
Absolutely.
Got it back to you. Because like I'm getting older, so this train of thought is like really a train for real. So don't forget, Jeff, write it down.
I did.
So I'm thinking about the previous presidential administration, right? And I'm thinking about the president who tested positive, had to go into the hospital.
The ex-president.
Former president, right. We still got to call him president though, but anyway. So how much do you think that episode with his doctor right, coming out, not really saying what was going on. Did that damage our perception of the reliability and relevancy of the medical profession in America? And do you think that the current administration has done enough to engender more trust, with the medical profession as we know it?
So it's a good question. I think it is critically important for our leaders to do everything they can to engender trust. Early on, this was really, again, we didn't know, there was so much we didn't know that it was very hard to do that. We've got hydroxychloroquine. There were so many other medications that people were throwing out there, and we were all desperate to find the treatment for this, that we tried a lot of things that in retrospect weren't helpful, and in some cases may have been harmful. And I will say that I really don't envy the position that the president at the time's physician was in, where, on the one hand, I'm sure there's security issues and issues of not being able to reveal everything that was happening. And yet at the same time, you want to be as transparent as you can for the public to have them gain confidence and to understand that the medical community, what we can do, what we are good at, and what maybe we can't do or don't know. And so I think the current administration is absolutely trying. Could it do more? Probably. But I would probably say that about any administration that's trying to handle the pandemic. There's always more we can and probably should be able to do. This has been an incredibly trying time on everybody, and I certainly don't envy our national leaders trying to address something that we haven't seen in this country for 100 years.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, so Hippocrates, your superstar, not in the Hippocratic Oath, but in his writings on epidemic, talked about do no harm. It's not in the Hippocratic Oath, I understand that, but it is in some of his other writings. I want to just get your thoughts on some lessons learned from causative versus correlation. Pavlovian behavior. The rooster moves his head, and a food pellet comes down, so the rooster thinks his moving the head is what caused the food pellet down. Have there been any surprises that you've seen? We heard respirators, and we heard, no, it's actually better to just turn the people on their stomachs. Any surprises that you went, wow, that was so counterintuitive, but it really was helpful?
Surprises. Well, so one of the things that we did learn over time, and again, this is why it's so important. People keep saying we got to go to the science, and it's absolutely true. There's so many anecdotal situations where there's one case that did really well, and they think it's because he, wore a blue shirt instead of a red shirt, or whatever. I mean, it was something along those lines. And again, early on, we were so desperate to find something that we could hold on to say this helps in this disease. Nobody liked the answer of there's not much we can do. And so we were trying so many things. And again, hydroxychloroquine was one example of something that jumped out there. And I think even at one point, the president took it as a prophylactic measure. And yet we're learning now that I know some doctors that took it, particularly some of the doctors that got this disease early on, got COVID-19. They took it because they just didn't know what else to do, and everybody was so desperate to find something that would work, some magic fix for this. What I would say is perhaps a little surprising, although not as much when you really delve into the science behind this. So steroids early on in patients that are really, really sick and were needing ventilator management made a big difference. And probably it is ascribed to their ability to reduce massive inflammation. Steroids early on in patients that were not sick, actually, there's some suggestions they may have done worse. And so we needed to be careful about differentiating when was the right time to use steroids. When was it appropriate not to use steroids? And we also talked about, you talked about proning, putting people on their stomachs. And although that seems a little counterintuitive, it absolutely was effective particularly in the really, really sick patients. We did it in the emergency department, and they did it quite commonly in the intensive care units with this. And so some of this was really evolving, learning more and more as we go. Nowadays, you can't open a medical journal without seeing something on COVID-19. And that's great because it means that we're studying every aspect of this disease to know how to be better at managing it.
Elephant in the room. Different incomes, different parts of the community suffered more. What do you think?
I think the pandemic exposed what was already there and is now even more obvious. Healthcare inequities are a huge issue in this country. Maybe certainly the world, but maybe more so in this country than anywhere else in the world. I don't know about in terms of other country comparisons, but I do know it is an incredible disparity here in this country. And for individuals, for populations, we know that access to healthcare is an enormous issue that we have to address. We talked earlier about some ways that we're going to get greater access. And I think, when we talk about truly promoting health equity, this is one step in that direction, is ensuring access to everybody. And, you and Curtis and others have made the great point. It's not equality, it's equity, more important, because we're not starting on equal playing fields, and therefore their equity is a different goal that I think is even more important. But this pandemic has shown that. And it's shown that we have a long way to go before we can truly achieve health equity. I don't know if there really is any racial difference in how this virus responds. I suspect there is not. I suspect that the differences, the virus doesn't care. I think the differences are related to our health inequities that exist in this country.
Thanks for that very thoughtful answer, and I really appreciate your thoughts on that. I heard the mayor, I think it was the other day, recommending that that the homeless, or those without houses, homeless is a little bit, that conjures up some different thoughts, are better served taking the J&J because it's only a one shot, and the certainty of being able to get in touch with them for the second is harder if they're without a home. What are what did your team and others, anybody have different experiences outside of the normal, the Moderna, the Pfizer, the J&J? I know you said take whatever you can.
Yes, and I think, so that answer, that's a really important question on two different levels. And I just want to open by saying, so my son works in a field that made him eligible for the vaccine in a different state, and he had actually he could get any of the three, and I told him take the J&J, in part because the one shot issue there. But I'd say that to emphasize, I honestly believe that these three shots are of essentially equal value. You can talk about the two shots versus one. You can talk about the efficacy. A couple of the trials involved more patients, more diverse populations, so therefore you can make a little stronger statement for one or the other. But in the end, and now with the new variants, how effective Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson has been more recently approved, more recently studied. Is it more effective on the variants? I honestly believe, with all of those questions out there, that we really are sitting on three essentially equal vaccines. And therefore, I think you can then start to say, if we take that as a given, then yes, you start to really say, in what populations is it going to be more difficult to get the second shot in there? And therefore, then we can really start emphasizing getting the J&J out to populations that will be difficult to get second shots. It's not just in those that are challenged housing wise, but it's in other populations as well where it will be difficult to get that second shot. Now, the greater question comes in, if I were concerned, or if we as a medical community are concerned that there really one shot is inferior, and that but because it's easier, or it would be more difficult to get a second shot in some populations, we're going to give them that inferior shot. Well, therein is some of the basis for the health inequities that we're seeing. And so you could potentially get into a situation where you might, again, and this is so crucial to how we're going to address inequities, is it's not just malintent. It's not just evil intent. There may be that, there certainly is that, but then it may be very well-intentioned folks that are still doing things that are heightening or increasing the inequity. And this could be an example of that. In this particular case, I honestly don't believe it is. I told my own family member to get the J&J. So only because, again, that the second shot, I just believe they're equal. So in that case, if their shots are equal, we can achieve equity by helping populations that might have trouble getting that second shot. But it does assume that those shots are equal. And if you don't accept that assumption, then we could potentially be building more on the health equity disparity.
This is not an argument to only taking one of the two shots. You mentioned this morning an interesting fact. I don't know if there's enough data to call it a trend. You mentioned something about people having 2 weeks after they had the first shot, the incidence of COVID. Can you share that with the audience?
Yes, we are seeing, and this is another important point, because there's a lot of us that when we get that first shot, we say, oh, thank goodness, and we start to really let our guard down. And it's really important that we have very good evidence that for those first 2 weeks after the first shot, you aren't protected at all. And so please don't go out right after that first shot and let your guard down. But we are seeing some very convincing evidence that come around right around 13 or 14 days after the first shot in all three of them, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, or Moderna. The immune system is really in a much different place to fight this virus. And so we have not seen, I am not aware of a single case that has been hospitalized or put in the ICU or died in the Bay Area where they acquired the infection more than 14 days after that first shot. And that goes with Pfizer, Moderna, or then in Johnson & Johnson's case, the only shot. So I think that's important to repeat, that I am not aware of any cases of serious illness or death from COVID-19 in people that have more than 14 days after their first shot been exposed to the disease. And so that just, it helps emphasize that, although I'm not suggesting that we let all our guard down 14 days afterwards, it's most important not to change any behavior until at least 14 days after that first shot. But we are much better protected at 14 days after that first shot.
Great, thanks. And we always say the easiest way not to hit a double fault is to hit the first one in. So
that's absolutely true.
Right. Chris, we just have a few minutes left. I've heard Dr. Fauci mention that, and great questions, Pepper, super, those were no faults. Those were first serves. All right. We heard Dr. Fauci talk about, I think he was overwhelmed. He said that he did not anticipate this number of deaths in the country because of this. I know you, Chris, you're a great guy, man. We love hearing you Friday. I just think that we're blessed to be able to have you in our presence, man, on Friday. And the Lord has elevated you even during this pandemic because of who you are, man. You are a healer. You are a healer, right? Personally for you, right, during this, right? And I know you've seen a little light at the end of the tunnel now. Was there any moment for you in the midst of all of this where you were kind of like overwhelmed, and what kind of human moments did you have?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes, and there were a lot of them, and it was more so early on in the pandemic, but it was the feeling of enormous responsibility to my patients, the ones I was taking care of, but even more so in my role as chief of emergency medicine at San Francisco General, is our commitment and dedication to all of our patients, and the unknown about this particular disease and this pandemic was so difficult to address. And you've already talked about some of those issues. Is what we're doing the right thing? Are we doing everything we possibly can for our patients? And are we sure that we're not doing anything that could potentially be harmful? And when there was so much that was unknown, there was that constant fear of learning that, whoa, something I was doing might have actually harmed a patient. I can't imagine anything more devastating than to have done something, whatever, regardless of my intention. Obviously, the intention was to do the best thing, but to have done something actively that could potentially, we learned later, was harmful. And so all those questions going on, it felt very overwhelming, and not having any good data early on in the pandemic, and even later where the data was good on some things and not so good on others, is still having those questions. Am I truly doing everything I can to help our patients and nothing to harm them? And then on top of that, the question is, are we doing that same thing for the providers? And I love your questions about, are you taking care of yourself? And my job is to take good care of patients and to take good care of doctors and nurses and healthcare techs and clerks that are taking care of patients. And in fact, a good part of my job is to take care of them so they can take care of you. And the same questions come up: is, am I doing absolutely everything that I can for them and not doing anything that's potentially harmful to them, overworking them, overprotecting them in some cases, or so many different things that could have been beneficial or also could have been harmful. And so all of that was very overwhelming for a long period of time, and sometimes still is. We are coming to a point where we understand a lot more about some of these things, but it felt like an enormous responsibility. It is an enormous responsibility. And so, yes, it was overwhelming many times.
Hey, this is an extraordinarily serious job that you have, and I love it. I will admit that one of my favorite movies is Patch Adams, because he wears the red ball on his nose and he gets patients to laugh. How important is humor in the healing process, and how do you introduce it?
Well, I think it's incredibly important. Now, you've got to be very careful, because obviously humor can go too far. And no, I mean, one of the greatest ways that you've known a patient, that you've helped a patient even just to relax, is to see them smile. And as I say, sometimes you can actually see the smile with the eyes, even when you can't see it with the mask. But humor plays an incredibly important role. But obviously, there's sometimes a very fine line between healthy humor and healthy, productive humor, and humor that can turn over and at worst be, but even also feel like it's being pointed at somebody or something or some situation. And in a pandemic where there's so many devastating situations out there, from jobs, from health, from family separation, from mental health issues, so many of us struggle with depression and isolation. And I could just go in so many different directions how this pandemic has affected people. And so we have to have humor to help our health, and yet can't ever let it seep into appearing to be laughing at such a serious matter. And so that's been a hard one to navigate. But you're right, you can't go without humor. You just have to focus it in the right direction.
I heard one the other day, and I'll turn it back to Curtis, where, having a conversation or sitting with this person, and all of a sudden she said, "Have you heard a thing that I have said?" And I thought, what a strange way to start a conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, listening is an art, especially now, man, especially now. So, we've had a great time. We spent about an hour of your time, and Mr. Onward and Upward has, oh yeah, there he goes. He's cracking me up, man. Oh, don't do that, man. Don't do it. Come on, man. Oh, San Diego. wow, you had me going there for a minute, man. I was like, what is he doing? No, stop him now. All right, so we're done, Chris, but could you give us some closing comments?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for bringing up so many important parts of what everybody is dealing with now. I'm really excited and I'm really optimistic about what these next months will bring us. And I really believe we can get to a point where we can start talking about opening up again. We're not there yet. And so I really want to keep that emphasize that point is please don't let your guard down yet. But there is a bright light now at the end of the tunnel. And we're talking about getting kids back in school and maybe even starting up in fall like we did 2 falls ago, before this pandemic ever hit, and really, get life back to some degree of normalcy, learn from what we have, be better for what we have gone through, but also come back to a place that I think we would all be more comfortable. And we are going to get there, but we have to stay diligent. Please consider getting the vaccine. If you have any concerns, there's lots of different sources to help answer your questions about this. And let's get our community vaccinated and let's overcome this horrible virus.
I want to close, and that is I'm a recipient of the incredible work that Chris Caldwell does and that Pastor Robinson does on behalf of those that you help. Thank you to both of you.
Amen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you for closing that out. You're welcome, Healy. Jeffrey Barr Healy. All right. And again, we want to thank Dr. Christopher Caldwell, Chief Physician at the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Emergency Room. And again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching us today on Momentum, a stewardship idea. God bless you. God keep you. Have a tremendous day. We love you. Peace.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody. Amen.
Amen.
Jeff, one quick question for you, if you got it, if I got you.
Sure.
So
You're still on, making a good one.
Peter's been getting into some really good schools. He's really excited, but he's expressed an interest in ROTC and maybe Navy or Marine ROTC. And I don't know. Do you have any opinions about that? Experience with it? Thoughts on it?
Well, I will reveal something. If there's any hackers on, I'm in trouble. All of my passwords include in one form or another the word service.
Awesome. That's what's up. There you go. That's
anyway,
why.
yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts further on ways to do that. But he's thinking about ROTC program. So anyway,
Beautiful.
That's good. All right, there you go.
Proud of him.
All right, thanks, guys.